Season 2, Episode 10, Velocity Makes the Difference. So, velocity is so powerful, guys. If you don't really understand the power of it, it's time for you to start practicing and trying out how powerful velocity actually is, okay? So we use velocity on drums very often, especially for piano to make it more natural. Now, a couple things I want to talk about velocity in this episode is, first of all, velocity is like the only way how we can make digital music feel much more real. When we have a real piano and we press a note lightly, or if we press a note hard, it's going to give us a significantly different sound, but it's going to also stay in pitch. What happens is the louder you hit the note, the harder that hammer strikes the string on a piano. And you guys can check up on YouTube, how does a piano work? And just so you can see this, but I want to introduce you to a word called timbre. And so timbre is like flavor. If we are using a synth and if we select a sine wave and if we just play that, it plays like a tone only because it's just like a single frequency. As soon as we start adding on different shapes, when we use sound design, we have like a square wave, triangle, sawtooth. We have all these different styles of waveforms, and if you're using things like serum, then it's wavetable synthesis, so then your waveform is very, very complex, which is very powerful, but sometimes you can start getting into like heavier phase cancellation, but you are getting very cool sounds. So when you are selecting different shapes, you are getting different timbre. So let's say we are playing A4, which is 440 hertz. If we press it hard, we are still playing A4, 440 hertz, if we're talking about a real piano. But the difference is, yes, it's going to be louder, but in the mixing stage, if we recorded that with a microphone, we have control in our music programs to turn the volume up and down, right? So therefore, volume isn't so much a factor when we're mixing the music, but what's happening is you're getting a different timbre, a different sound, okay? So the pitch, which is the fundamental pitch, and that's how all their notes stay in pitch, it's the fundamental of that note, but on top of the note is what they call harmonics or overtones. In other words, those are just complex words just for saying frequencies on top of that fundamental pitch, okay? So it's just important for you to understand that you hit that note harder, you get a different sound. You get a different timbre is what it's called in the industry. Just listen to the different sound, but it has the same pitch. I played it twice in each octave. Now, I teach you this in my Sound Design Basics course. It's called Sound Design Basics 101 by Gratuitous, or you can look by Riley Weller, depending on how you know me out there. Okay, so that's the first thing about velocity. Okay, so velocity you think is volume, but velocity is actually not volume. Velocity is a number value from 0 to 127. So it doesn't matter what music program you use, that's how these music programs work, and that's how MIDI works, M-I-D-I, right? I always talk to you guys about MIDI is by far the most important thing as a music producer because it actually gives you ultimate control. When we record our audio, such as I'm talking to you right now in this podcast, my voice is recorded. I can't change. Like if I step far away, like back here, hello, I can't change this. You're hearing the sound of the room more. Now I'm nice and close, right? So that is the downside to recording audio. And once it's printed, once it's recorded, that's what you work with. For us as beat makers, we have it so good. We have it so easy. We have MIDI. So you play your piano notes. Well, what do? You can adjust them however you want, but then you can also change what? Velocity. All right. And then you can do this on each individual note. And FL Studio makes it really easy because you can just click and highlight many sounds. You can hold down Alt and the scroll wheel when you're in the piano roll, and you are going to be able to adjust velocity on these virtual instruments. Now, it's important for you to understand that because digital music is essentially numbers, velocity is how we get that quiet and that loud sound. So yes, it does volume, but it can also trigger your virtual instrument to play a different sound. Okay, so for example, from let's say 0 to 64, it's always playing this certain sound, and it's also adjusting the volume in there. But then from let's say 65 to 127, then now it's playing a different sound, and again, depending on how hard you press it, it can also be changing volume. But what I'm trying to say is how digital computers work is when you press a note, depending on how fast you press it, okay, it's not how hard you press the note. And you can test this too. So for example, if you take a note and if you push slowly but hard on it, obviously not hard enough to break the key, but you just push it hard as if, because you're thinking about, oh, that's hard velocity, right? But no, it's how fast that note is played, which triggers the velocity number, okay? So again, in MIDI, there's a new spec coming out. And so, but right now, we only go from 0 to 127. And that is just the value that we work with in music production. But just to repeat that, so the MIDI that we've always worked with is 0 to 127. So when you press a note, this is how you're adjusting the velocity, which can be just volume, but some instruments also change timbre. Okay, so quite technical, but it's important to understand that this is velocity. And so now when I talk to you about safe spots and the organic tools, again, I always talk to you about velocity because that is a free tool that you have to learn how to use, because that's how we as music producers, that's how we get the emotion and life into our music. If every single note was 127, because again, we go from 0 to 127, that gives no life to your music. Every note is the same volume. And when it comes to a piano or just every single instrument, every sound, even if you're playing an 808, 808's maybe a little bit different. You want them to be pretty consistent, but pianos, maybe not so, guitars, right? To have the dynamics a little bit, that's how you get a lot of emotion. And so it all comes down to velocity. So once you click your sounds in for a drum loop, or once you play your notes, and then again, if you quantize them, like we talked about in the last episode, now you can start adjusting velocity. So in addition to the note nudging, okay, so all these things are the organic tools, the velocity, the note nudging, layering, which we haven't talked about in depth recently. But even quantizing is kind of like your organic tool, because it's essentially quantizing is like note nudging, except you're just note nudging everything on grid. And then you can go back in manually, note nudge again, so that it's you adding a more human flavor. Because again, when we have digital music, and if you were to quantize, everything sounds too perfect. And then if you don't have a MIDI keyboard, and if you're clicking in your sounds, or if you're using a computer keyboard, such as like your QWERTY keyboard, QWERTY, those send a fixed velocity. And this could really be harming your music because everything's sounding so perfect. And so when you play off a MIDI keyboard, it helps preserve the more natural audio, such as like if you were to record, because it's giving different velocities with each note depending on how fast you press that note, right? Which again, kind of correlates with how hard you're pressing the note. But again, you can do a test yourself on your MIDI keyboard by how hard you press it versus how fast you press it. So there you guys go. Velocity is probably, I wouldn't say like the most powerful, because timing is probably the most powerful. If something's not in time, your music is so out of time. Okay, so your music's got to be in time. And again, I like to quickly quantize, like I showed you before with that shift and Q, which quantizes the beginning of the notes. Then you can go in and use these organic tools, right? So the organic tools are in my Safe Spots book. But even if your beat is on time, and if you've note nudged a bit, velocity is what allows a lot of this note nudging to work. Okay, like there's techniques out there such as like a flam, or even like with your drum. So in like a lot of like hip hop, you can have the drum play like 1-2, like really quick. So in FL Studio, remember, like I said, so if we have one beat, which is a quarter beat, which is 4 steps. Okay, so if you're looking at the channel rack, you have 4 gray steps, right? And then 4 red steps. So 4 gray steps is one beat. And with Safe Spots, I tell you that the first step, which is a 16th note, is the on beat. And the second one is A in between. The third one is the off beat. And the fourth one is B in between. Now, if this is like later on, so imagine it's on like beat 3. Okay, so if we have beat 1, which is gray, beat 2, which is red, beat 3, which is gray, now again we apply safe spots. So we play it on the step 1 and step 2 of beat 3. Let's say on step 1, that is where you might use some velocity, because what's going to happen is the drums are going to be the exact same volume and it just doesn't give that boom, right? Because you're turning down the volume of the one drum and it kind of works its way in. Okay, so again, velocity, super powerful. And if you guys have any questions about the organic tools, feel free to send me an email. They are by far the most powerful tools you have in your music program, and they are free. And a lot of you guys aren't taking advantage of them. If you guys come to itsgratuitous.com, you guys can check out the Safe Spots book, and I'll be coming out with more training on drum loops and safe spots, and a way for you guys to download the free Safe Spots guide, which teaches you about safe spots, and it also teaches you about the organic tools. It will be free. You guys can sign up and download it, and then I'll just give you guys an offer if you want to buy the book. Okay, so I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll talk to you in the next episode.